He needs to try to find some way to disrupt Brad Nelson and steal not one, but 2 games off of a very tough matchup. Let's see how this unfolds. As I mentioned at the onset, the loser, done.
And Paulo taking a look at this hand. He's got the Teferi, one of the most important cards in the matchup to have early. He's got the Scryland, so hoping to just try to find a white source, get that in play early. And, you know, there's definitely Clarion is not quite as strong unless Brad has the start where he goes turn 2 Paradise Druid, which he actually has in hand.
Yeah, he might just do that here, so that could work. No white source just yet, though, for, well, either Clarion or Teferi Time Raveler. Gulp. Yeah, that could get ugly. Brad Nelson,
big draw.
What did he find?
So this was a really big draw because he did have the option of just running out of Paradise Druid, but then that leaves the window open for Paulo to play turn 3 Teferi Time Raveler. Now he can go Growth Spiral, play Island, and still have the Mystical Dispute up for a potential Teferi.
As it turns out, Paulo has not found that white mana source that you mentioned, Paul, and Growth Spiral is going to go on the stack here for Brad. Boy.
Yeah, and Brad's in good shape.
Paulo's already on the verge of a loss here, right? I mean, if he doesn't find a white mana source, he can't cast any of the 3 spells with white mana, and then his hand is just all Cavaliers.
Hey, look at Brad's hand. It's just all counter spells. And Brad was actually in a really good spot there. You would be thinking, hey, why isn't he leaving up the counter spells? Well, even with the Paradise Druid, he has the Aether Gust up for a potential Fires of Invention, and he has the Mystical Dispute for a card like Sphinx of Foresight or Teferi Time Raveler.
Now, the one thing he is missing are some of his flash creatures, right? You know, he'd love to see a Nightpack Ambusher or something here to start applying big pressure to Paulo's life total. So it looks like he's going to have to go in the middle here with the freshly drawn Hydroid Krasis for 2.
Right. And Paulo does have a pair of Deafening Clarions, but really needs to find a white source here to be able to play some Magic.
Yeah, a 4th land would be good so he could deploy Fires of Invention, but that won't work either, as we know. He doesn't, though. Shimmer of Possibility. Well, it is called Shimmer of Possibility for a reason. Let's see if he has one.
Well, I mean, given that Paulo's missed some land drops here, I wouldn't be surprised if Brad just fires off a counterspell here on the Shimmer to kind of continue slowing down Paulo, because think about it. Paulo probably just drew that this turn, right?
Yeah, for
sure. So he's not going to play a land this turn. So it makes sense to counter that because Paulo, all he wants to find are mana sources.
This game is just about over here. Brad is attacking for 4 points of damage. He does need to find some other way to pressure the life total, most likely, but his hand is all counter spells against an opponent who's not only limited by color of mana, but amount as well.
Yeah, I mean, this deck is extremely clunky, and you know, you don't need that much pressure, right? You just need a couple of threats on the battlefield to attack every single turn, and you know, with a hand of 4 counter spells against a mana-screwed opponent, I mean, it's not going to take a long time.
Paulo just thinking about just using an Aether Gust proactively here, because otherwise he has to discard anyway. Oh, and there we go. Frilled Mystic now from Brad Nelson. Probably going to shut the door on this thing.
And Brad might want to just continue applying pressure. The combination of Aether Gust plus Mystical Dispute means Brad can counter whatever Paulo can play next turn, and this is just added pressure.
So this would maintain 4 damage coming through and give him 7 points of power on the battlefield as well. So this is now a 2-turn clock, and Brad can really just sit back and protect this board now, knowing that in 2 turns the game will be over anyway.
Exactly.
And what do you want when you're trying to protect your board? Well, how about 4 counter spells in hand? That'll work. Upkeep stomp here from Paulo, trying to reduce that 2-turn clock to 3. And the question for Brad is, how important does he think it is to slam the door in this game and burn a few counter spells to do so? It seems like actually in his benefit. Normally the players would be patient in a situation like this. It is only 1 turn more, but Paulo misses land drop again. Yeah,
no, Brad's definitely going to fire off a counter spell here. It's just a question of which one he wants to cast, basically. And he's just thinking about the sequence here, the order. What can Paulo potentially draw here if he found a land? Could he go double Bone Crusher Giant, for example?
Right. And he's going to use Aether Gust because Aether Gust is effectively a hard counter in this position. Paulo does not have the luxury of putting it back on top of his library from this juncture, so he's going to have to put it on the bottom. And there's another missed land drop, and that's game number 1.
Wow.
Going to Brad Nelson. I'm going to say, Paul, we did think that this matchup heavily favored Brad. Not normally quite in that way, though.
Yeah, I mean, Brad just had the ideal start, right? I mean, he had the man, and he just drew 6 counterspells that game, while Paulo also stumbled. I think Paulo, that key makes sense because he also knows that one of the key cards to the matchup is getting that Teferi in play because it's so good. If you can sneak that Teferi, and all of a sudden, all those counterspells are negated. Yeah. So, Paulo just kind of took that chance, had the scryline, but just couldn't find the mana.
Never hit his 4th land drop that game, and Brad Nelson cruises to an easy Game 1 victory. He told Becca earlier, he's like, look, I'm going to win. I'm going to put myself in the top 4. And also something to keep in mind here, Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa, he will be playing in Worlds. He's got his seat locked up. But Brad doesn't yet. And, advancing to the top 4 in this tournament could put him in a much, much better position to take to take the seat.
Absolutely, and many of these players who are also looking for a slot at Worlds, if they're not playing against him, it's Javier Dominguez. If they're not playing against him, they're all rooting for Javier Dominguez to win, as he's already got a ton of tournament wins. If he wins the event and you lose to him in the finals, guess what? You're also going to Worlds.
Yeah, it's a really awkward situation because Javier has taken 2 slots already, and if he makes it and wins, it'll be his 3rd seat in Worlds. Like, come on, Javier.
Yeah. I will say that after sideboard, I think Paulo has a better chance because he does get to sideboard in 4 copies of Mystical Dispute. So he can now set up turns where he goes, Teferi with Dispute backup, and just having access to some way to counteract some of your opponent's, permission spells helps out a lot.
Paulo's considering whether he wants to play Temple of Triumph or perhaps a land with Shimmer of Possibility this turn. He also does have Mystical Dispute in his opener. Does he want to fight over something on turn 2? Like a Growth Spiral from Brad. Well, he's going to keep the option open in any case, plays the Temple of Triumph, puts a card on the bottom, and passes the turn back to Nelson. Boy, this could be over quickly, and once again, I mentioned it when we came into the match, but if you're just tuning in, this is an elimination round. We are in the lower round 2 here, and that means the loser of this match is done.
I mean, look at Brad's hand. He's got 3 counterspells here. But Paulo's got a nice hand here as well, right? I mean, he's got plenty of mana this time around. He's got the Mystical Dispute and a couple of threats. He might just be able to... The thing is, if he can somehow find a way to just even stick one of those large creatures, he could be in good shape. We saw before how the Simic Flash deck really struggles to even just beat a 5/5 that's on the battlefield.
Brad is going to go for Growth Spiral in response, but yes, Paulo Vitor says, you know what? No, I'm going to Mystical Dispute that and get it out of here. Cavalier of Gales is the pickup with the Shimmer. And you know what? This curve is coming together here for Paulo. He can go Sphinx into Cavalier.
I think Paulo is just going to start running things out and hope Brad runs out of counterspells.
That seems to be the plan. But if you look, it does actually match up well for PV right here, but not for a long time. This is going to get countered probably by a Quench. It could be Mystical Dispute, but...
It's actually interesting. The thing is, the Quench and the Mystical Dispute, of course, as the game progresses, it gets worse. At the same time, Brad really needs to find mana sources, right? He wants to keep hitting his land drops to try to play Nissa. So that's probably what he's thinking about. Which counterspell do I want to cast here? Well, if you use the Sabotage, you get to do the Surveil. And by doing this, it looks like he's going for the Mystical Dispute. If he found a land, he would have gone for the Quench.
That's right. He missed the land, though. He did find one for his draw step. And now he's got 4 mana available, including 2 green and 2 blue, which is really kind of the nightmare scenario if you're sitting in PV's seat. But the truth of the matter is, PV just doesn't have any other choice.
Right.
This is an attrition fight now.
This game plays out a totally different way. We saw Paulo play a beautiful match against Piotr Glogowski. He ended up losing the match, but that doesn't take... I don't want to take anything away. That game 1 was played fantastically. He took 4 or 5 unintuitive lines in a row and ended up winning as a result. And, you saw how, he could be very elegant in his plays. Here, you're just jamming and hoping something sticks.
That's right. And so far, the only thing to stick on the battlefield is for Brad Nelson. It's Nissa who shakes the world. Another Sphinx of Foresight off the top. And once again, Paulo Vitor is left to just keep on firing off. But the breeding pool getting activated by Nissa means that Quench was available, and Brad gets to counter that. This one is slipping away from Paulo almost as quickly as the first game.
I mean, now you can see why Brad was so confident in this matchup. This matchup looks so brutal.
It's over. That's it.
For Paulo.
Right? He just eats
this is it.
and then it's 9 damage.
Yep, and you get in for 9.
Brad Nelson said this was his best matchup. He also said, I'm going to go on to the top 4, and he was right. He is cruising by Paulo Vitor, Damo, Rosa. He picks up the victory, and onward for Brad Nelson. He is looking for a world seed, and he's becoming one step closer every single time. Paulo, thankfully, already had his world seed, so he doesn't have to worry about that part, and his tournament's going to end here. But a fantastic run by him, and I'm with you, Paul. That match that he played against Piotr Glogowski, one of the best I've seen played in a long time. But ultimately, Brad Nelson takes down the round and advances. And of course, really important for Brad too, he just avoided elimination. I mean, this is, we're at the